London in the winter of 1814 glittered with a brilliance meant to distract from war, hunger, and the quiet unease that lingered beneath the Prince Regent's pleasures. Carlton House blazed that evening like a jeweled promise, its windows glowing against the fog, its steps crowded with carriages depositing silks, titles, and ambitions in equal measure. Inside, chandeliers rained light upon polished floors, and the air trembled with music, laughter, and the ruthless arithmetic of society, where rank was weighed, fortunes measured, and worth too often mistaken for spectacle. Miss Eliza Harcourt entered this world without expectation, which was perhaps the only armor she possessed. At 21, she bore the delicate manners of her class and the quiet caution of poverty, the latter learned early and never forgotten. Though her father held the courtesy title of Baron, his estate had long been mortgaged to memory, leaving Eliza with lineage but little else to recommend her in rooms such as these. Her gown was modest, carefully altered from a former season, its fabric clean yet unremarkable, chosen to offend no eye and inspire no admiration. She wore it not in hope of notice, but in obedience to duty. Around her, the ballroom unfolded like a living hierarchy. Heiresses moved in radiant clusters, diamonds flashing at throats and wrists, their laughter practiced and unafraid. Mothers assessed prospects with sharp, smiling eyes, while gentlemen calculated alliances behind bows and murmured compliments. Eliza was greeted politely, if at all, her presence acknowledged with nods that ended too quickly to become conversation. She was introduced and forgotten in the same breath, her name slipping from memory as easily as it entered. She felt no surprise at this, only a familiar tightening beneath the ribs, the small humiliation that arrived not with cruelty, but with indifference. When a young lady nearby remarked, softly yet not softly enough, that it was a mercy some girls learned early to expect nothing, Eliza understood the comment was meant for her. She answered with silence, the practiced refuge of those who cannot afford offense. Her dance card remained untouched, its blankness an unspoken verdict. Seeking composure, Eliza withdrew to the edge of the room, standing near a column where shadows gathered and sound softened. From there, she observed with the clarity of one who had long stood apart. She noted how admiration followed confidence, how wealth excused arrogance, how beauty, when paired with fortune, became authority. It was a lesson she had learned repeatedly, yet each repetition carried its own sting. Still, she lifted her chin, determined that invisibility would not also mean disgrace. It was then that a change passed through the room, subtle yet unmistakable, like the pause before thunder. Conversations faltered, laughter dimmed, and heads turned not toward the doors, but inward, as though bracing themselves. Eliza followed their gaze and saw him. The Duke of Ravenshaw stood near the entrance, his dark coat severe in its tailoring, his posture unyielding, as if the habits of command had been etched into his bones. His presence carried no flourish, yet it commanded attention all the same, the way a drawn blade commands respect. She had heard of him, as all had. A soldier returned from brutal campaigns, a man rumored to advise the crown in matters better left unspoken, feared for his discipline and admired for his restraint. He did not smile as others did. When he spoke, people listened. Women watched him with caution, sensing instinctively that admiration here might cost more than it promised. Eliza did not expect his notice. She had learned not to expect notice from anyone. Yet as the evening wore on, she felt, impossibly, the weight of a gaze upon her. At first she dismissed it as fancy, but the sensation returned, persistent, unsettling, until she dared to look. Across the room, the Duke's eyes met hers, steady and intent, as though he had been searching and had finally reached the end of his patience. Her breath caught, not with anticipation, but with unease. She looked away at once, her pulse unaccountably quickened. When she glanced back, he was no longer where he had stood. The space beside her seemed suddenly too small, the air close with heat and possibility. Before she could step aside, a shadow fell across the polished floor at her feet. "My lady," he said, his voice low, controlled, carrying neither apology nor ornament. Eliza turned, startled by the nearness of him. Up close, he seemed carved from severity, his expression composed, his eyes dark with something she could not name. She curtsied automatically, murmuring a reply she scarcely remembered afterward. He did not offer his name. He did not look away. "I found you," he said quietly, as if the words had been waiting years to be spoken. For a heartbeat, the world receded. The music, the movement, the glittering crowd dissolved into a distant blur, leaving only the weight of his attention and the strange certainty that whatever she had been moments before, she was that no longer. Eliza searched his face for explanation and found none, only resolve. Around them, society resumed its measured rhythm, unaware that in the shadow of a column, something irrevocable had begun. She felt exposed in a way she had never known, not because he had spoken, but because he had seen her, truly and without dismissal. Questions pressed against her lips, yet none escaped, bound by propriety and the sudden awareness that every choice from this moment forward would carry consequence. The Duke inclined his head, not in dismissal, but in acknowledgment, as though a pact had been silently struck. Eliza remained where she was long after he withdrew, her hand resting against the cool stone of the column, steadying herself. She did not yet know why fate had reached for her, nor what price it would demand, only that the safety of obscurity had been stripped away, and with it, the quiet certainty of her former life, forever altered. The following morning dawned pale and unforgiving, its winter light revealing what candlelight had disguised. London, ever alert to novelty, had already begun to murmur. By breakfast, Eliza Harcourt's name travelled on lips that had never spoken it before, carried not with admiration, but with curiosity sharpened into suspicion. The Duke of Ravenshaw had been seen speaking to her, alone, without introduction, and such breaches of form were never forgiven without explanation. Eliza sat by the window of her family's rented house, her untouched tea cooling beside her, aware that something intangible yet irrevocable had shifted. She replayed the moment endlessly, the weight of his gaze, the certainty of his words. "I found you." Found her from where, and why? The question unsettled her more than the whispers already stirring beyond her walls. She was not unused to scrutiny, but this attention bore a different shape, heavier, edged with consequence. Her mother, gentle yet anxious, observed her with concern, urging caution without understanding what caution might require. Eliza could offer no reassurance, for she had none to give. That afternoon, when the carriage arrived unannounced, she nearly refused it, certain the driver had mistaken the address. The seal on the note bore no flourish, only a crest she recognized instantly. Inside lay a slim volume, bound in worn leather, its pages softened by age. No message accompanied it, yet the choice spoke clearly. It was a book of verse, one she had loved in girlhood, mentioned once in passing years ago to a stranger she had never expected to see again. Her fingers trembled as she traced the familiar title, memory stirring with quiet force. The gift was modest, defensible, yet impossible to dismiss. It did not dazzle, it acknowledged. That was what frightened her most. Eliza pressed the book to her chest, unsure whether she should feel honored or endangered. Already, she sensed how quickly gratitude might be twisted into presumption by those eager to see her fall. In the days that followed, her world narrowed and sharpened. Invitations that once arrived reluctantly now appeared with renewed interest, though their warmth felt performative. Faces studied her, measuring her worth by reflected light. During her promenade in Hyde Park, she noticed how conversations paused as she passed, how eyes followed, calculating, questioning. She walked with careful dignity, refusing to lower her gaze, though the strain of composure weighed upon her shoulders. It was there, amid bare trees and gravel paths, that she encountered him again. The Duke approached with deliberate restraint, his expression unreadable, his bow precise. Their exchange was brief, conducted within the rigid boundaries of propriety, yet charged with unspoken meaning. He asked after her health, commented upon the weather, then paused, as though weighing something unseen. Before parting, he remarked quietly that he hoped she found the book agreeable. No one else seemed to hear, yet the words lingered long after he had gone. That evening, scandal found voice. A matron, well-placed and sharp-tongued, suggested that Eliza ought not to mistake curiosity for intent. Another remarked that such attention rarely benefited girls without fortune. Eliza listened, silent, absorbing each remark as a reminder of her precarious position. She wondered if the Duke understood the damage his notice could inflict, or if he believed rank alone could shield her from consequence. Yet he did not retreat. At the next assembly, his presence aligned unmistakably with hers. He did not monopolize her, nor did he ignore her. Instead, he acknowledged her with consistency, offering conversation when it was permitted, defending her with calm authority when a careless jest threatened to wound. Once, when a gentleman spoke too freely of her prospects, the Duke's intervention was swift and final, delivered without raised voice yet leaving no room for reply. The room took note. With each gesture, admiration curdled into resentment. Suitors who had once considered her a harmless option now withdrew, unwilling to contend with a man whose favor could elevate or destroy. Eliza felt the isolation keenly, yet beneath it stirred something unfamiliar, a fragile sense of being chosen not for advantage, but for herself. Still, doubt pressed close. She feared being a symbol, a curiosity, a distraction from battles she did not understand. The Duke, for his part, remained enigmatic. His manner never softened beyond civility, his intentions cloaked in discipline. Yet when he looked at her, she sensed an intensity that belied restraint, as though recognition had forged a bond neither could easily sever. She longed to ask him what he sought, yet feared the answer might expose hopes she dared not claim. Matters reached a precarious point when a rumor, sharpened by repetition, reached her family. It spoke of expectation, of influence improperly bestowed, of futures being shaped without consent. Eliza confronted the Duke in a moment of rare boldness, requesting clarity with all the dignity she could summon. He listened, grave and attentive, then assured her that he would not compromise her honor, nor withdraw his regard without cause. It was not a declaration, but it was a promise, and she felt its weight settle upon her heart. As winter deepened, the tension between them remained unresolved, stretching taut between propriety and desire. The book he had given her lay by her bedside, its pages now marked with her careful annotations. Each night, she read by lamplight, aware that words written long ago had carried her to this moment. She did not know what claim the Duke believed he held upon her, nor what claim she might yet assert upon herself. But she understood now that attention, once given, could not be returned unaltered. Society watched, waiting for her to falter. She resolved, quietly and fiercely, that if she must stand beneath that gaze, she would do so unbowed, even as the path ahead narrowed toward a reckoning neither of them could avoid. The invitation arrived without flourish, sealed in the same restrained hand she had come to recognize. Eliza read it twice before accepting its meaning, then once more to steady herself against the quiet certainty that this moment had been approaching since the night at Carlton House. The Duke requested her presence at a private sitting-room adjoining the library of a mutual acquaintance, a place respectable enough to permit conversation, yet secluded enough to allow truth. She dressed with deliberate care, choosing simplicity over display, aware that whatever passed between them would alter her life more surely than any public spectacle. The room was warmed by a low fire, and softened by lamplight that clung to the spines of books and the polished surface of the table between them. When the Duke entered, he dismissed the servant himself, closing the door with measured finality. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not empty, but weighted, heavy with things unasked and long restrained. Eliza felt her composure tighten, not from fear, but from the anticipation of answers she was no longer certain she wished to hear. He began without ceremony, acknowledging the strain his attention had placed upon her. His voice carried the same disciplined calm she had come to expect, yet beneath it stirred something more fragile. He spoke of duty, of reputation, of the danger of misinterpretation, and then, finally, of memory. Years earlier, in the chaos following battle, when pain and pride had stripped him of command, a young woman had offered assistance without name or expectation. She had spoken to him as though he were merely human, and then vanished. Eliza listened, her breath shallow, as recognition unfolded not with drama, but with quiet clarity. She recalled the wounded officer, the bloodied uniform, the refusal to be thanked. At the time, she had thought no more of it than she did of any kindness, yet his gaze now told her what it had meant. He confessed that he had carried that moment through years of violence and loss, measuring himself against it, seeking its source with a patience honed by war. She answered softly, explaining that she had acted from impulse rather than courage, from habit rather than virtue. To her, compassion was not exceptional, it was necessary. He seemed struck by this, as though the simplicity of her reasoning unsettled him more than any declaration might have done. The distance between them shifted, narrowing not by movement, but by understanding. For the first time, she saw him not as society's formidable figure, but as a man shaped by endurance and restraint. The Duke admitted that when he finally recognized her at Carlton House, he had doubted his own certainty. Yet the memory had returned with unmistakable force, and with it, a resolve he could neither deny nor explain. He had not sought to endanger her, he said, only to acknowledge what had been lost to silence. His regard, though restrained, was deliberate, and he would withdraw it if she commanded. The choice, he insisted, must be hers. Eliza felt the weight of that choice settle upon her shoulders. She confessed her fear of becoming a symbol rather than a woman, of being admired for what she represented rather than who she was. She spoke of poverty, of learned invisibility, of the risk inherent in hope. Her words trembled only once, when she admitted that his attention had awakened something she had believed herself immune to. The admission lingered between them, fragile and irrevocable. He did not move closer, did not reach for her hand, yet his expression altered, as though a wall had been breached. He told her that he admired her not despite her quietness, but because of it, that in a world built on display, her restraint felt like truth. The confession was not ornate, but it was complete, and it carried the gravity of a vow unspoken. For a moment, Eliza imagined what it might mean to be chosen so fully. Their understanding was interrupted by the sound of movement beyond the door, a reminder of the world pressing in. The Duke stepped back, reasserting the distance propriety demanded. He warned her that knowledge once shared could not be undone, and that society would not forgive what it could not comprehend. Eliza nodded, absorbing the cost implicit in his words. She did not retreat, though her heart urged caution. When they parted, it was with renewed formality, yet something essential had shifted. Eliza returned home beneath a darkening sky, the city's lamps flickering like uncertain stars. She knew now that the Duke's search had ended, but her own had only begun. The memory of his confession followed her into the night, not as a promise, but as a question, one that would demand an answer when the world least expected it. The reckoning arrived not with thunder, but with a summons spoken politely and carried by consequence. Word reached Eliza that the Duke of Ravenshaw intended to make a declaration at the next assembly, one attended by figures whose approval shaped futures and erased reputations. London waited, poised between anticipation and censure, eager to witness whether fascination would mature into commitment or collapse into disgrace. Eliza felt the familiar pull of fear, yet beneath it lay something steadier, a resolve forged not by ambition, but by self-knowledge hard-won. She prepared herself with care, not as an ornament, but as a woman who understood the weight of her presence. Her gown was simple, chosen deliberately, its restraint a quiet assertion of worth unborrowed from excess. As she entered the ballroom, she sensed the collective attention settle upon her like a held breath. Faces turned openly now, no longer pretending indifference. She did not lower her gaze. She had learned that dignity, once claimed, could not be begged for. The Duke stood apart, composed as ever, yet when he saw her, something unguarded crossed his expression. He approached with the same measured steps that had first unsettled her, but this time there was no ambiguity in his intent. When the music paused and conversation thinned, he addressed the room with calm authority, his voice neither raised nor tentative. He spoke of memory, of honor, and of choice, framing his words with the precision of a man accustomed to command. He acknowledged Eliza openly, naming her without qualification, describing her character rather than her fortune, her actions rather than her lineage. He spoke of a debt beyond repayment, of respect earned in silence, of affection grounded in understanding rather than advantage. The room listened, caught between disbelief and admiration, aware that such candor from such a man was not lightly given. Eliza felt the impact of each word like a steadying hand at her back. When he turned to her, the world seemed to narrow once more, though this time she did not feel exposed. He asked, formally and without presumption, whether she would accept his regard and the consequences it carried. The question was not a command, but an invitation, and its sincerity left no room for retreat into doubt. Eliza heard the murmurs ripple outward, felt the expectations press close, yet she answered from a place newly secure. She spoke clearly, her voice steady, acknowledging the risks before them, the scrutiny, the sacrifices required. She affirmed her willingness not because he offered elevation, but because he had offered recognition. In choosing him, she did not abandon herself, she claimed herself. The simplicity of her reply carried more weight than any flourish, and in its wake, the silence deepened. The Duke inclined his head, accepting her answer with a gravity that matched its cost. He did not reach for her, did not claim victory, but stood beside her as an equal, signaling to all who watched that whatever followed would be faced together. Society, confronted with resolve rather than spectacle, faltered. Some smiled with approval, others with calculation, yet none could deny that the moment had passed beyond their control. In the days that followed, opinion shifted, not without resistance, but with inevitability. Royal favor, once uncertain, settled cautiously in their direction, persuaded less by romance than by the Duke's unwavering composure. Eliza endured the scrutiny with quiet strength, discovering that confidence, once internalized, rendered judgment less cruel. She was no longer the girl who waited in shadowed alcoves, though she had not forgotten her. Their union did not erase hardship, nor did it soften the Duke's nature into something unrecognizable. Instead, it refined him, lending warmth to restraint, purpose to discipline. Eliza found in partnership a space where her voice mattered, where her past was not a liability, but a foundation. Together, they moved through the world with measured steps, neither defying society nor submitting wholly to it. On an evening not unlike the first, Eliza stood once more beneath the glow of chandeliers, though now she was not alone. The Duke's presence beside her was neither shield nor shadow, but companionship freely chosen. She reflected then on how easily history overlooked women like her, those whose strength was quiet and whose influence was felt rather than seen. Yet she also understood that recognition need not be universal to be transformative. When he spoke to her later, in a moment unobserved, his words were simple, stripped of ceremony. He told her that finding her had altered the course of his life. Eliza smiled, answering that being seen had altered hers. The exchange required no witness. It was enough that it existed. Thus their story settled not into legend, but into something rarer, a truth lived daily, sustained by choice rather than chance. In a world governed by rank and expectation, they had forged a bond neither fragile nor loud, but enduring. And if history remembered them at all, it would not be for scandal or spectacle, but for the quiet courage of two souls who recognized one another and refused, at last, to look away.